What's going on, everybody? This is AJ, your host of the Blue to Green podcast. Today's episode is going to be a heavy one. I was honored to sit down and talk with Mr. Rick Bucher, who is a 27-year veteran of the Scottsdale Fire Department. And throughout his career, he had a pretty astonishing career, helped a lot of people, saved a lot of people's lives. But throughout that time period, he did not understand and realize that we all need a little bit of help ourselves as well. And in this episode, we discuss the spiral that he took in his own mental health and what ultimately ended up leading to him committing suicide. But fortunately, it's probably the only unsuccessful thing he's ever done in his life. And he was brought back to life. He has a new lease on life. And we were able to sit down and have this conversation. So this is a pretty fascinating one. It's pretty heavy. And it's just part of the process that we all need to do to start talking about our own mental health, how we can help each other, how we can ask for help without, and it's not a sign of weakness. And we could start breaking the stigma. For our law enforcement, firefighters, EMTs, all of our first responders, military veterans, and all that, what does this look like and how can you get the help? Well, that's something that we all strive to be better at. And there needs to be better services. This is part of Rick's mission in life now, is to have these open conversations. It's been a part of my goal with this podcast, is to have open, honest conversations about mental health and what can we do system-wide to help people with their trauma. So thank you very much for tuning in and having a listen. I hope we all learned something. And Mr. Booker's contact information will be below, and he is available to speak to anybody who wants to as far as first responders go. So thank you very much, everyone. Take care.
All right, he threw some things out of the car. We're right there. He's throwing some things out the passenger side. They're along the wall, the slow lane wall. 619, he's throwing dope out the window. We got bales of marijuana coming out.
619, I copy bales of marijuana coming out of the window at 2320.
Rick, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, AJ.
This is insane how all of this happened. And I want to give a little background and a little context.
Yeah, you're going to have to, because nobody knows
right?
Our history.
Right? So a couple weeks ago, I'm dropping my son off at school, and I've got the little podcast app on my phone, and it dings that there's a new episode being released of my favorite podcast, Andy Stumpf Cleared Hot. And that's my favorite podcast. And I see the name Rick Bucher on it. I'm like, that's a strange coincidence. I know a Rick Bucher.
It has to be the same.
It has to be the same. And then I start reading the bio.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm very confused. And I'm reading the bio and I go, okay. And it talks about a 27 years, 27-year veteran of the Scottsdale Fire Department who committed suicide. And I was sitting there and I pulled over immediately and I was like going, wait a minute. So I started reading through and then I immediately hit play and I started listening, and holy shit, it's Rick, but you're on a podcast talking and the description says committed suicide.
Right.
So I listened all the way through, and I have to, we have a lot of parallels in life. And so the way we know each other is, and again, my mind is going a million miles an hour thinking of all the different things and all that. And we know each other because back in the late 90s and early 2000s, we rode sport bikes together.
Yeah.
We raced out at Wild Horse Pass, or whatever it was called back then, Firebird Raceway.
Firebird, yeah.
We rode motorcycles. We rode all around the state of Arizona. We rode and had a good time for quite a few years.
Yeah, with probably the best sport bike club that's ever
Amen.
existed. Phoenix Sport Bike Club. This is awesome.
Amen. It was a good time.
Cool.
It was such a good group of people too. We weren't stupid,
Well, yeah, and what people listening to this aren't going to realize is that, yes, we were a sport bike club, but we were kind of the responsible sport bikers. So we required people to wear their gear.
Yes.
And you had to show up at the pavilions, car and bike show, in person to get access to the website and the forum, which showed where we were going to be riding. Otherwise, nobody knew where we were going to be.
We were a closed group. Yeah. We no stunts in the city, no wheeling, no doing stupid stuff.
Yeah.
We went out to the twisties and rode and had a good time.
Yeah. And we had some of the fastest sport bikers in the Southwest in the club.
I was I left for the Air Force about in 2002, and I remember the leader of our group, Will Darton. I was finally catching up to him on the track because I'd only been riding for a few years. But what I wanted to say though is that you were amazing. You were a fucking rocket out there. I remember I've got pictures somewhere in here. I was gonna look them up, and I've got pictures of you dragging your hands and your knees and dragging your hand around corners.
Yeah,
just insane stuff back then.
Yeah, I in pretty much everything in my life, I take it to 11. If it'll go to 10, great. But I've said it before, if it'll go to 11, it will. And I did that with the club. When Will moved across the country, I took over as president of the club.
Okay.
And then when things really started kind of getting out of hand in the canyons, we decided that we needed to do something at the racetrack.
Okay.
And that was a turning point for the club in a lot of ways. A lot of the people that were riding really fast in the canyons did take it to the track.
Yeah.
And we kind of never went back.
Right. That's when I was in the Air Force and gone, but I stayed active on the forum for a little bit, and it was no more twisties. It was all Laguna Seca. There was one in New Mexico. I can't remember the name of that one.
In Deming.
Yeah.
I forget what that was called, but we travel all over the Southwest and go to track days. And then when I got involved in racing, that was an avalanche. We put a group of, I think, about 10 of us together, and we all got racing licenses one weekend.
Nice.
And we started racing, and then before I knew it, I won a heavyweight superbike championship my first year as an amateur.
Do you still ride by any chance?
I have a Vespa.
Okay. Railing the corners in that baby.
Explain that. Riding a Vespa is actually scary.
Oh, I'm sure.
These little 12-inch wheels, that it feels like you're riding in a shopping cart or something. But got that as a kind of a runabout to go with a Class A motor coach that Lynn and I are going to pick up here in about a year.
Nice.
And we're going to travel the country. So I'll go into that. But sport bike racing really took off, and I got invited to assist with the new riders clinic with Road Race Southwest. Okay. And then before I knew it, I was the lead instructor, and then I was rewriting the curriculum and getting ready to take a leave of absence from the fire department because I had gotten my AMA Pro license. Nice. And I was gonna go race pro for a year. So in 2009, the plan was to, I had actually gone undefeated in 2009. I was racing my Yamaha R6 in 3 600cc classes. Okay. The 750 class and 3 1000 classes. That must have been one hell of a built R6. It actually wasn't. Because it had to be super sport legal, which is the slowest version of the middleweight class. But in the categories that it was allowed, I ran slicks. Okay. So the engine wasn't, it was intake and exhaust, really. It was the rider. And a superior suspension setup. Gotcha. I had a ton of track time because I was teaching. So I was on track all day from when it went hot to when it went cold. In 2009, from January until May, I'd gone undefeated. I won 27 straight races. Nice. And I was racing against AMA guys on leader bikes. And I've got great onboard video on YouTube of a race on Maine, on Firebird, Maine. And there's an AMA Pro that's trading leads with me every lap. He would roar past on the straight because ton of horsepower. Oh yeah, on a leader bike, yeah. But then on the return road, which is totally twisty, I would always catch him, and I would pass him before the last corner. So halfway through this race, I'm thinking, okay, where is Tom passing me in relation to the start-finish line? And I realize he's passing me after the start-finish line every time. So I knew if I can get into that last corner first on the last lap, I'm going to win this race. And we swung leads like 7 or 8 times, just over and over. and I had the camera facing backwards, so I got great footage of him just punching the top of his tank at the finish of the race. So anyway, great times racing motorcycles until May of 2009. I actually crashed 3 times in the same day.
That's not good.
No. I usually always got great starts. I'm really analytical about things. At some point, I actually sat down and identified 21 different things that go into a perfect launch on a motorcycle. So if I were a drag racer, I would have probably cleaned up at that because I could always get really good starts. For whatever reason, I bogged this one. A buddy of mine, Zach, was in front of me. I sat behind him for a few laps, and this was on Firebird East. And I identified a section of the track where he had a weakness, and I knew I could exploit it and get past him. So when the time came, I let a gap develop between me and him, and then I put just a savage run on him, and he low-sided right in front of me. And I was closing in on him at, probably a good 10 or 15 miles an hour faster than he was going. And by the time he fell, I was pretty much on him, and I ran over him. So I broke his pelvis with my wheels.
Yeah.
I went over the bars, crashed, destroyed a helmet, ground the leathers all the way through on my left knee, and had a bike that was in a pile in the runoff in the gravel. Crash truck comes out, puts the bike in, gives me a ride back to the pit, and my crew put the bike back together. Because I had spare body work, spare clip-ons, levers, foot pegs, everything. And it kind of needed it.
Yeah.
They put all that shit on. But I also had a spare helmet.
Okay.
And I mentioned this in another episode, but typically, if you damage a helmet to the point that it's out of service, your racing weekend is over.
Absolutely.
Because they give you one tech sticker for your helmet.
Okay.
And they don't give you a second one. But because I was an instructor, I had all these friends in the community, and one of the guys came over, and my spare helmet happened to be sitting there on the table, and he said, "Okay, your helmet good? Got your spare leathers? You need anything?" "No, I think I'm all right." And I went back out and raced.
And you didn't have any injuries at that from the first one?
My left boot had actually, the sole of that left boot, the insole, felt wet.
Okay.
When I got back into the paddock, and I took my boot off, and I realized I just pretty much filled my boot up with blood from my left knee. So being a medic, I treat myself, bandage everything up. I've got spare leathers, spare boots, spare helmet, everything. Go back out, get kind of a poor start again, but I'm running okay, maybe the top 3 or something. And I went for the front brake going into the slowest corner on the course, and it was hitting something. I was getting brake pressure, but it was like hanging up on something. So I run off into the gravel again. I whack the tire barrier. I damage my spare helmet. Damage some parts on the bike again. What had happened was when they replaced the clip-on, when they put the throttle tube back on, there's a little detent in the clip-on that the throttle tube is supposed to seat on. And lap after lap, twist and wide open throttle, the detent wasn't in the little recess. So that whole throttle tube twisted. And on a Yamaha, the throttle cables that come out of that obstructed the travel of the brake lever. So short story long, have kind of sort of brake failure, crash the bike again, back into the pits. I'm out of helmets, but my buddy Philly brings his spare helmet over, get the bike back together, go out again after lunch.
Was anything telling you to stop?
No, and I don't have that in me.
I know.
I mean, that's, and at that point I was leading 7 class championships, and the overall, the following Tuesday, I was slated to go to a track day at Laguna Seca.
Okay.
And I was also, this is when GoPros were new.
All right,
I had the first generation GoPro. I was actually putting together a plan to form my own high performance riding clinic.
Nice.
Which would use GoPros mounted to my bike, front and rear, the rider's bike facing them so they could see their body position. And then I'd have an assistant trackside, like a corner worker, videoing. So, and then we'd come back into the classroom and do video analysis and all that. So all these things are going. So driving forward was the focus. There was never consideration that
you don't have that stop button.
I should just not do this.
You don't have that stop button built into it.
I don't. So I go back out after lunch, get a poor start again. I'm running 4th behind 3 of my buddies, and those guys were running pretty much nose to tail. It was a very compact group. Do about the first 4 or 5 laps. I crank on the throttle to make sure that the thing isn't rotating. Brakes are working. Everything's good. I feel fine. So I line them up for a pass going into the slowest corner of the track onto that straightaway. And I'm thinking I'm at least going to take the last guy in the group, or I'm just going to pass all 3 of them, depending on how this goes. So I get a raging run at them, doing about 110, 115 coming into that turn, and I go for the front brake lever, and it comes all the way to the bar.
That's not a good moment in your life.
No brake pressure at all. So I have to decide: am I going to bowl over 3 of my buddies and have a catastrophic crash at this speed, or quick swerve left, get all over the rear brake, and try and get the bike stopped? I picked the latter option. As you know, the rear brake does nothing. I'm fishtailing through the gravel trap, and I hit the tire barrier head on, this time at about 90.
Ugh.
So it tore the front end of the bike off. The forks, the headstock was actually torn completely off of the bike. The bike and I flew up and over the fence, the outer fence of Firebird. And I fractured my left ankle, my left femur, and my neck in 2 places. That ended my day.
That ended your day.
Yeah.
That'll end anybody's day.
Yeah. So that was, recovering from that was my first experience with PTS. It was also my first experience. Well, it was my second experience with addiction. I had broken my back rock climbing in 2003.
So before we continue, if we wouldn't mind, we have jumped light years ahead.
We have.
So, and again, this is the sort of thing, just because we know each other and there's a history there.
Yeah.
Could you go back and just kind of give a little bit of explanation as to your background and what you're doing here?
For sure. That would be good. So, I was born in Effingham, Illinois, adopted at 4 days old. Eventually, early in life, moved to Fort Worth, Texas, and that's where I spent my time growing up. Kind of typical middle class family. We lived across the street from a golf course, so I grew up doing that, but I also did all the traditional sports that my dad kind of pushed me toward: football, baseball, basketball, soccer. But I also played alto sax in the band.
Okay.
So I did everything. Like from the beginning.
I played alto sax for 2 years as well. So as a kid,
unbelievable.
As a kid, though, it was like in elementary into junior high and all that. So
yeah, this was junior high. I actually made first chair all city band in Fort Worth, Texas, in middle school. So I was pretty good at it. Still love music. Haven't played sax in quite a while though. Moved to Scottsdale, Arizona in '87. Middle of my freshman year. I was 14 years old. Terrible time to A, lose all your friends back home, and B, try to break into some kind of a friend group here
And it's not like today where you got text messages and can stay up with everybody.
No,
it's not. You're done.
So it was challenging, but I think in a way it was good because I wound up with a lot of adult friends through bicycle racing.
Okay.
And interacting with them, I think, gave me some social prowess, and I was able to interact with my peers better than if I didn't have those adult friends. And they also gave me a good dose of perspective too, because, you know, when you're working with older people, you know, you talk about your personal lives, and they're talking about completely different things and worried about completely different things than I am, and it just kind of put things into perspective. So yeah, I grew up working in bicycle shops here in the Valley, and I got into bicycle road racing when I was 14 and abandoned all the other team sports.
Okay.
Actually abandoned music too. So
That's what grabbed you.
It did. It did for sure. And the thing about bicycle road racing is that it's actually a team sport, despite what it kind of looks like on the outside. And having the team sport background really helped me with cycling, because I knew how to lead, but I also knew how to follow, and those skills are important in life.
Very much so.
And later in my career were paramount. So I'm racing bikes. I'm working at a bike shop. I do a ride along with one of the guys that works at the shop also. He's a Phoenix firefighter.
Okay.
And all day on a Saturday, nothing happened. We didn't run a single call until evening, and we were wrapping up after dinner, and they got a call for a working fire, which is kind of it's somewhat rare. A working fire doesn't happen every shift,
despite what people think.
Every week, it's you know, and for every actual working fire where you pull up and there's flames and smoke coming out of the house, you'll run 5 or 6 fires in quotes that are nothing.
Gotcha.
It's food on a stove, or it's a closed flue in a fireplace, something like that. We pull up, there's smoke blowing out of the front of this house, and my buddy Hugh and his crew go inside, put the fire out, come out, high five, take their gear off, and I'm thinking, holy shit, this is it. Like I want to do this.
Yep.
And at that point, I had graduated high school. I was going to Scottsdale Community College studying business to get a degree that I didn't know what to do with.
Right.
Like I did that because my dad was in the business field, and I thought that was the right thing to do.
Gotcha.
But yeah, by the time I got into accounting, I realized, forget it. This isn't for me. So firefighting kind of found me as much as I found it. I moved out of the house, walked down the street from my apartment to the nearest fire station, and pretty much just asked them, are there any jobs here? And this was in 92, 93.
Okay.
And Rural Metro is a private fire protection corporation that contracted with Scottsdale at the time. In fact, that company started in Scottsdale back in the 50s, I believe.
Correct me if I'm wrong, though. There was no Scottsdale Fire Department. It was all Rural Metro.
It was Rural Metro.
Gotcha.
The shirt said Rural Metro, but everything else looked like a normal municipal fire department.
Right.
The trucks were the trucks, the uniforms were the uniforms, our policies, procedures, protocols, all that stuff. It's just another fire department.
Gotcha.
But the city was paying this private company for fire protection. So I go into the fire station, and they asked if I was an EMT. I said, nope. Okay, yeah, you got to get your EMT cert. Cool. I go to SCC, get my EMT, and I think we were actually in between semesters.
Okay.
So the timing was perfect.
Gotcha.
So I get a spot in class. Went back to the station a semester later. Same captain is there. Are there any jobs here? Well, have you taken any fire science classes? Nope.
You could have told me that a semester ago. I could have knocked this out at the same time.
I know. I could have done this months sooner. So I go back. I took fire hydraulics, which
Okay.
is a class that they give experienced firefighters when they're ready to drive the truck and set the pump for a fire and get water out of the thing. And all
That's
that.
the engineer position, correct?
Exactly.
I got a bunch of friends that are also firefighters. So.
Okay, yeah. So I take that class. I was definitely putting the cart before the horse, but I've always loved science.
Okay.
And to apply it to the fire service was perfect for me because it was something I was interested in. And when I get interested in something, it's on. Like I'm 100% all in. So I go back.
I understand that completely.
I go back. There's a different captain on when I happened back in, and said, "Hey, yeah, EMT got a fire science class. Are you guys hiring?" Yes, we are. So I got on as a reserve, and that's how you started back then. A reserve was a part-time firefighter,
Okay.
and they were used to supplement the full-time staff when there were fire incidents or big medical calls or things like that. But then they also served a wildland role. So
Okay.
they did wildland firefighting a ton. And then at a certain point, once you've been in reserve long enough, you get shift qualified, and they'll start working you 24-hour shifts.
Is the reserve position a paid position?
Not unless you're working.
So when you're not on duty, it's
the
unpaid.
Craziest model, but yeah, you're not paid unless you go on calls.
Gotcha.
But you're paid to go on drill. If they need a truck shuttled across the city, you can pick up extra hours doing that. But you could also do ride-alongs and get paid for calls if you want to ride along.
Get the on-the-job training and the experience.
Exactly. So then I got hired full-time and went to medic school pretty quickly after that. And
how did you? Pardon me. I also became an EMT when I was in law enforcement. Was there a required period of time you must be an EMT for a certain length of time before you get sent to medic school?
Yeah, at that point you had to have a year of field experience before you could go to medic school. I think that's actually changed.
It has.
Shameful and unimaginable that anybody with basically no field experience can walk up with a defibrillator and drugs and treat people. Pretty weird. Anyway, I got into rock climbing pretty quickly after we moved here to Arizona. And at some point during a reserve drill, we were doing ropes and knots. And I'm tying all these knots that they're calling out. Hey, figure eight on a bite, figure eight follow through, bola and all this stuff. And I'm basically tying them without even looking.
Gotcha.
And my captain said, "So you been practicing or, what's it?" I said, "Nah, I've been climbing rock for a long time. So this is all real familiar to me." And he said, "You should go to the TRT drills for the technical rescue team because they do mountain rescue and everything with rope." And I said, "Okay, cool." So I start going to that, and you get paid as a reserve to go to those drills.
Nice.
But I also started responding when they would have technical rescue calls. And at that point, I'm working at a Mexican restaurant and a bike shop.
Okay.
And I'm a reserve.
And you're a reservist.
So I was hustling. But being a reserve and becoming a firefighter was number one. That was my top priority. So I dedicated myself to it, kind of like everything else I've done. I got hired full time, and typically a technical rescue assignment does not materialize for somebody until they've had at least like 5 or 10 years on.
I was just going to ask, how long had you been on? So you got on full time, went to medic school.
I got on full time and I was still an EMT.
Okay.
My first day as a technical rescue tech in an assignment was my first day out of the academy.
Oh, wow.
And the captain that made those decisions knew that I'd been coming to drill and I had some skills and I was highly interested in this and that I would probably be good at it.
You were proficient at what you were doing.
I was at least getting there. As a probationary firefighter, you don't know shit,
right?
Really. I mean, you know how to put out a fire, but yeah, there's so much street knowledge that you have to know.
Right.
But yeah, I had the fundamentals for sure. So from day one, I was a rescue tech.
Okay.
Which was great because that's where I wanted to be and that's what I wanted to do. It was tough though because I was getting exposed to some pretty high level traumatic shit right away from the beginning of my career. So double-edged sword. Later in my career, it was still a double-edged sword because on a lot of calls that we went on that were really crazy circumstances where one paramedic was going to get sent to do something,
Mm-hmm.
I was the one to do it because I had more experience than anybody there. And I had started teaching again. So I was an instructor for the East Valley. I did that for about the last 12, 13 years of my career.
And
So,
before we go on, if you could describe what is technical rescue?
technical rescue is anything that a normal fire truck would pull up to and go, I don't know what the fuck to do here.
Okay.
So it includes things like trench collapse,
Okay.
confined space rescue, high angle rescue of all sorts, a worker up on a power line tower, stuff like that, a worker trimming a palm tree that gets stuck, swiftwater. We've got a ton of flooding in the valley right now. So swiftwater rescue. And then our bread and butter was mountain rescue.
Okay.
So Scottsdale is an urban city, but in the rural portions of it, where like in the mountain preserve areas, they're proper mountains and a couple 100 miles of trail. So people go out onto those trails and get injured, have medical issues, get stung by bees. I mean, you name it, fall rock climbing. And I handled all that stuff over the course of my career.
How many times every single summer is some dumbass from Minnesota, who brought a bottle of water with them? That happens, probably 2 to 3 times a day, I would assume.
At least.
Like that legit
But
real numbers.
The funny thing is it doesn't happen in the middle of summer.
No, really?
It happens in spring and fall.
Okay.
Because during the proper summer here, everybody knows, like, it's way too fucking hot to be out hiking.
You're a moron if you do.
For real.
You just are.
Yeah. People still do.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of them equip themselves well and, take a gallon of water with them. Winter and spring visitors will show up and they will go out when it's in that 80 to 85 degree range thinking, oh, it's pretty nice. And they kind of underestimate it.
They're from flat ass Nebraska
Yeah.
where there's not a mountain in sight. And then like, I'm going to go climb this little hill.
Right.
It's not little.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, those are a lot of the people that I rescued over the years.
Gotcha. Now, and I have a little bit of a background as well in this as well. Did you work with all the other teams? Was it like a mutual, I know there's mutual aid. There
is. So in 2005, the City of Scottsdale formed their own fire department and gave Rural Metro the boot.
Okay. I didn't know it was that late. I didn't know it was 2005.
It was 2005. There was a drive to make that change in about 2003.
Okay.
Maybe early 2004. But it failed, and then the city decided on their own.
Okay.
But they put it up to a vote first, and when it didn't pass, that was when the city said, okay, we're going to form our own fire department.
Okay.
So come 2005, there are 2 different ways that different cities assist each other with regard to police and fire. And those are mutual aid and automatic aid. Cities have to ask for mutual aid.
Mm-hmm.
So the dispatch center gets a call, they see it's in a certain location, and another city would actually be closer to it to respond. They have to call that other city. Automatic aid works like this, and this is what started in 2005 in Scottsdale. We became part of the valley-wide automatic aid system.
Okay.
So when anybody called 911 in the valley, with just a couple exceptions, like Indian Reservation and a couple other communities, the closest unit would respond, regardless of what color the truck was or what city it came from. So if you call 911 from the far west border of Scottsdale, there are a lot of places where a Phoenix truck will go automatically on that call. So with technical rescue, when we had rural metro, we worked a lot with SO, with Maricopa County Sheriff's Department, and we used their air platform for rescue, which was Fox. Yeah. And that was actually the first helicopter that I ever rappelled out of.
Okay.
And I did that in like 94.
Okay.
And then they upgraded. They got a Bell 407 that had a hoist on it. So that was my first hoist work with those guys. But we also worked with DPS, which was Ranger 41. And we rappelled exclusively out of that. They never ran a hoist while we were using them.
They didn't get a helicopter with a hoist until about 4 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I'm sure this is blowing people's minds right now because I've rappelled out of helicopters and I've been lowered out of them with a hoist, like a lot more than I can even remember. I always felt better rappelling.
Okay.
Because I had control over the thing. But that's viewed as a really archaic kind of old school thing, and
as opposed to hoisting.
Hoisting is much safer.
Well, the whole reason I became an EMT, I was out on a call. I was out working just my regular road shift, and we got a call of whatever. Somebody was on an off ramp at like I-10 in Chandler or Ray or whatever it was down in the southern part of the valley. And it was like a fight in progress or something like that. So I parked my car and I'm walking up and down and I'm looking for this and I'm actually putting effort into my job. And one of our medics just so happened to be driving past me on his way to another, down to Tucson to cover a shift. And he goes, I'll be out with him real quick. And he goes, and he said this, he goes, what are you doing out of your car? I said, well, I'm looking for these people. He says, no troopers do that. They just drive by, say there's nothing there and go on. He goes, we want motivated people for Ranger. Have you ever thought about it? I said, not a day in my life. So he says, well, come on down and talk to us. So then I ended up just talking with our lead. This is 10 years ago, 2011-12. I met with a guy named Dan Milan, who was the lead paramedic for, he was stationed out of the station up in Phoenix. Yeah. And I went and talked to him, and he explained to me what to do. So I went and got my EMT. And then when I was an EMT, I got onto as a part-time SWAT operator, or on the SWAT team, and I was a crisis negotiator. And one of the things we had to do was become rappel certified. Yeah. Yeah. I very quickly learned my ass ain't getting out of the helicopter. It's not happening. So I I got rappel certified. Yeah. And it was terrifying to me. So, and then I had been running a bunch of pursuits and everything, and I became very good friends with the Mesa Air Unit. And actually, at the beginning of my podcast, I have a little clip of one of my pursuits, and it's from the Mesa Air Unit. And it's just something that I finally got it in there, and I've been trying to get it. That was me.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So
it kind of sounded like you on the air.
Yeah.
On the radio.
So so that's one of my pursuits where they were throwing bales of marijuana out, which we have not gotten there yet, which ties into the cannabis world. But so I'm going on a ride along with Mesa Air one day. And this is when the progression for me was going to be is go to EMT school, get on with Ranger. They'll send me through medic school because you can't be an EMT, you have to be a medic, and then just move over to Ranger full time. Yeah. So I was doing a ride along one night with a buddy of mine, and I said, "Hey, do me a favor." He goes, "What's that?" I said, "Bring it to 150 feet and just hover." I said, "Because we have to rappel from 150 feet." He brought it to 150 feet over Falcon Field Airport, and I looked down and I went, No. I said 150 feet, not 5,000 feet. And he goes, "Dude, that's it." I said, "I can't do this." Yeah. So I called up the lead paramedic and I said, Dan, and I said, "I can't do this, dude." I said, "I'm too terrified. I'm not going to waste space of trying, you guys sending me through medic school and me getting my medic card.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah. I said, "Thank you very much." So I kept my EMT for a few years, but you guys that were doing that out of helicopters that's next level stuff. Especially when you're doing coming off of a mountain and you're rappelling off of a 10,000 foot mountain and now you're however many feet in the air.
Right.
Nope.
Yeah.
Nope.
Oh man. Yeah, I got a lot of stories. In 2005, there was actually a period of a couple of months where we had started working with Phoenix Firebird 10. Mm-hmm. Actually, we were using all the Firebird airships, and they had 11 at the time, mostly patrol, but they had a fleet of, or a group of 3 that they used for rescue, and they were Augustas. And during that couple months, we were actually training with SO, DPS, and Phoenix.
Okay.
So we were doing helo ops almost every week.
Yeah.
And with that volume of training, you can't help but get good at it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So the guys in Scottsdale quickly became the best air rescue techs in the valley. So at the time, Phoenix was a jealous suitor, and they said, if you're going to use us for helo ops, you're going to use only us for helo ops. And when you use us, you're going to use Phoenix firefighters as the techs.
Okay.
And our staff said, no, you're not going to fly into Scottsdale and have Phoenix guys work in the helicopter. It's going to have to be our guys. So Scottsdale Fire was the first agency outside of Phoenix to work with Phoenix on their helicopter.
Okay.
So they put us through their training, which it was good. You know, I mean, it was on par with everything else. But we, for whatever reason, after 2005, they opened a bunch of trails in North Scottsdale, and our call volume went through the roof. So I was flying helo missions multiple times a month, which for most guys in Phoenix, I'd say if they get 1 or 2 a year, that's a pretty big deal. So yeah, it just became normal.
Yeah.
But working with a helicopter was definitely the most dangerous thing I ever did in the fire service.
Really?
By far. Because you've got 20,000 parts that are all spinning and trying to come apart. You've got the variables of wind and weather and terrain and patient condition and your own mindset. There's just so many different things that are kind of out of your control. And if things go sideways when a helicopter is involved, something really bad is going to happen. And if there's a mechanical problem and I'm on the hoist halfway down, they're going to punch a button and it's going to release and cut the winch cable.
That's not good.
Yeah.
I never thought about that before.
That's a matter of procedure. Yeah.
And it's probably just ingrained into them as part of their training. Like, oh, this alarm went off. I have to hit that button.
Yeah. And they confirm that, you know, the crew chief was the one to do it. And depending on what agency we were with, if we were rappelling out of the helicopter, there was a rope, like a harness system that was anchored across the belly of the helicopter. And there were levers to pull to detach it. Because if that helicopter's flying along and the 90-foot rope that's dangling gets hung up in something, they're stuck. They have to be able to punch it free.
Valid point. Never thought about that.
Yeah, so that possibility was always kind of in the back of your mind. But so anyway, with TRT and having that TRT assignment adds that responsibility to the normal fire truck that I'm riding around on, and the normal medical stuff that I'm doing as a medic. So we had a regular fire truck at our station, and we ran all those normal calls, but then we also had a technical rescue support truck that was loaded with all the equipment for that. So
how old are you at about this time when you're responsible for all of this?
When I started, I was 20 years old as a reserve. Yeah. So by the time I was full time and got that assignment, I was about 23.
And what people don't realize is everything you just said it's not just going to work and having fun. You have to maintain proficiency. You have to keep up on training. You have to keep up on your gear. As a 23-year-old young man, that's a shitload of responsibility that you are responsible for.
Huge.
You know, on top of that, not understanding, you had said something earlier that, you know, starting at such a young age was a double-edged sword, and starting, you know, so fresh was a double-edged sword. And were you prepared at all? Were you given any preparation for that amount of responsibility, for that amount of you know, drinking from a fire hose? Sorry for the fire pun.
Yeah,
but
I was familiar with what was going to be involved with an equipment maintenance with regard to that, with regard to training. with regard to running calls and putting out fires and saving people, but I had no idea what I was getting into from a mental health perspective. And there was nobody at that point that said anything about it.
Right.
So it's like trying some new green. As soon as you get it, you want to try it, or having a new gun. As soon as you get it, you want to shoot it. Having a new skill of fighting fire. I wanted the world to burn.
Yep.
Because I wanted to be the one to put it out.
Yep.
I wanted the world to have medical emergencies so I could be the one to save them. Like, bring it on. I want to do this. But then it really started happening.
Mm-hmm.
And the first few that you go on, it's exciting, it's different, it's scary as hell. Your hands are shaking from the experience. But it's exciting.
Mm-hmm.
And you start to want more of that. But as that piles up, eventually in, I think, every firefighter's career, that pendulum swings from I just want calls to I hope that the tones never go off again.
Yeah.
I don't want to run another call. There's a swing that happens. And pretty much all of my old friends that are still firefighters feel that way.
Yeah.
They're like, dude, if I never ran another call, I'd be totally fine with it.
There's a mantra that's kind of beaten into. There's a lot of parallels. So real quick here, I joined law enforcement, and I got out of the military and joined law enforcement, and then later on became an EMT. And one of the reasons I also became an EMT is, again, that one EMT that said, or medic who said something to me, but we had a call where, you know, if you're familiar with the Phoenix Valley at all, there's the northern and the southern part of the 202, and there was, the accident happened at the southern part and not the northern, but fire got dispatched. It was a terrible, terrible accident, and the fire got dispatched to the wrong location just because the person calling 911 didn't know where they were. Right. So I got there, and a guy was down for about 15 minutes, and when fire showed up, they started doing CPR on him, and I do not fault this firefighter at all. We were cops. We were there to make the scene safe, get the bad guy, and then let the bravest come in. Or I can't remember. The bravest are the cops, the finest are the firefighters. I think that's the way it works. But this person was down, and they started doing CPR on him. And I'm thinking in myself, I'm like, going, dude, he's been down for 15 minutes. There's no way he's coming back. And I looked at the firefighter, and he's sweating bullets and doing CPR. And I said, oh, is maybe we, and I was kind of joking around, bad timing for, gallows humor. Yeah. I said, oh, maybe we should have done that. And he turns back and he looks at me and goes, that would have been a really good fucking idea. And went right back to work. And then that's when I kind of got the mindset to maybe I need to do more. Yeah. So where I was going with this is that the parallels and the similarity between law enforcement and EMS regarding the adrenaline rush are identical. And
I believe it.
When I had so when I became an EMT, I didn't have a preceptorship. DPS did not have an EMT program. They had a medic program. So I used to go to my friends that were on the fire truck, say, hey guys, I'm an EMT, I need supplies. And they would give me stuff. So the very first time I had my very, very, very first time to utilize my brand new skills, what you said resonated with. I just wanted to run medical calls. I wanted to be the first one there. I wanted to be the one there so that I could tell my guys in the back, hey, you guys keep the scene safe. I'm going to work on this patient. And I remember the first time I had a save. Oh my God. It was
it's something else.
Oh my God. Can I tell the story just real quick?
Of course. Yeah.
It wasn't my first save, but it was my, for lack of a better term, coolest. It was a head-on in the downtown Phoenix area on the I-10. Gnarly accident. You know what they're like. And I show up on there, it was in another district of DPS. So this district was calling for help from us. So we're coming in, and I wasn't really familiar with that area. So they're saying, shut this down, that down. The next unit didn't do this. I got on the radio, says, I'm the next unit in. I said, I'm an EMT. I'm going to go to the scene and triage. And my boss knew this. He goes, bring my, whatever my call sign was, Edward 619, up to the scene. So I show up to the scene, and this was the rush, that adrenaline you're talking about, and not putting it together. I show up on scene. I have Phoenix PD guys there. I have my DPS guys. There's a captain there, and there's all these people. I start saying, go to this car, do this, go to that car. Tell me who's talking. Tell me who's not talking. Fire's nowhere to be found. They go, this one's not breathing. So I go running over to the car, and I've got my medic or my EMT bag with me, and I can't. This car is it looks like a crumpled up Doritos bag, and I can't get to the driver. So I climb into the back seat, and it's summer, so it's 1 billion degrees out, and I get an OPA in her mouth, and or an oral airway, and I start doing CPR, wrapping my arms around the chair, and I'm doing CPR from behind her. So I'm in the car, and the Phoenix guys are going, what do you need? What do you need? They're coming up to the window. What do you need? They said, the fire department's here, and I'm doing CPR, and I can hear her. She's starting to grunt a little bit, and I just continue to do CPR. The technical rescue guys showed up on scene, and they go, hang on a second, and they throw a blanket over us, and they started cutting the shit out of that car. Yeah. So we get her out of the car. I'm drenched in sweat. I get her over to the ambulance, and I give as much of a report as I possibly can, and I'm shaking. I'm like, holy shit. This was the humbling, the cool part, the adrenaline part, and then the humbling part. Everybody's coming up to me going, holy fuck, dude, that was amazing. And I'm like, that was pretty cool. So I'm walking back to my car. I mean, I'm a little guy. I'm only 5'7", but I'm 9 feet tall and 600 pounds of muscle. And I go to my car. I throw my bag back in the trunk of my car, and I'm going back into the scene, and everything's taped off, and all traffic is stopped, and people are recording with their phones and all that. And I shouldn't laugh, but I'm thinking I'm 9 feet tall. These guys, my captain comes over and says, holy shit, dude. And like everybody's high-fiving me, and I'm walking, and there was this piece of car that was covered in grease on the ground that I did not see. My right foot hit it, and I went flat on my fucking back right in front of everybody. Oh, man. And I just kind of looked up for it, and I said, okay, all right, I'm humbled now.
Humbling.
I get it.
Yeah.
But it's that adrenaline rush. It's that addiction. It's addiction. It's addiction to adrenaline. And I was going to say that I remember that, like, as a joking around back in the day when we were riding bikes, we would say, man, Rick is a total adrenaline junkie. And just because of the way you rode and, the way you were, but it's that addiction to adrenaline is what it is. Yeah. And wanting to be the hero without wanting to be the hero. You want the recognition. You want to do it. You want to save that person. I didn't need any accolades or anything like that, but I wanted to be that person.
Right.
I wanted to be that person to show up, go to the call, save the person. So, I mean, and I understand that addiction.
Here's the weird thing about that is that after a while, there's actually no adrenaline.
Right.
So I did it 27 years. I think probably about after year 15,
okay,
it would take something very out of the ordinary to get a rise out of me, to get that adrenaline going. And so I went to medic school shortly after I got hired full time, but a short time after that, I got wrangled into precepting new paramedics.
Okay.
And at some point, somebody said, "You're just so calm. How do you stay so calm?" And I always told my new medics, "You're not allowed to panic until I panic." And they're like, "Well, that's going to be never." Well, then there you go.
There you go.
Yeah. At some point, the adrenaline kind of went away, and I still had, that 10 or 15 years of having adrenaline involved in mountain bike racing, road bike racing, rock climbing, work. So at that point, I started having to do extraordinary things just to feel normal, like to actually get some kind of an adrenaline response.
What does that sound a lot
that
like?
would make me feel like a normal person.
What does that sound a lot like?
The elevating levels of addiction. You know what? This much doesn't work anymore.
Right.
I'm going to do more.
Yep.
I'm going to do more. I'm going to do more. Racing motorcycles. I mean, there's an amazing sensation that goes on sitting on the start line of a race, whether it's a motorcycle road race, a bicycle race, a mountain bike race. You have this feeling like you're a caged animal, getting ready to launch. And that was kind of the mindset when I told you there's 21 different things involved with a perfect launch of a motorcycle. Mindset was that you had to feel like you were the bull with a rider on your back, barging against that gate, waiting for the cowboys to pull it open. So I chased that feeling.
Yeah.
And as much as I felt that on the start line of a motorcycle race, after the green flag waved or the light went off and I went through turn 1, I was thinking about what I was going to have for dinner that night. I was thinking about the weather. Like I was in that deep of a flow state with racing that I could completely relax in that. And that was flying into a corner with the rear end sliding because you're backing it in, and then steering with the rear end of the bike, exiting a corner on throttle, sliding the rear again. Like just being that comfortable in that kind of a flow state. And when I could really do that at work, that was when I was able to do probably the most good. Yeah. Because instead of having tunnel vision, it opens everything up and you're free to take everything in and realize everything that's going on around you. It's like a heightened sense of situational awareness. But I think at some point, trauma trumps that. And in a way, I think if you're not amped up on adrenaline and you're relatively calm, because you're aware of everything around you, you are more susceptible to trauma. And for me, one of those things was being on a cardiac arrest call and working on a patient that's clearly gone. Right. But having the family in the other room. The new guy that's doing chest compressions is tunnel vision, just looking at the patient. They're not aware of the color of paint on the walls or the family that's around or anything that's happening other than that patient. But for me, I'm taking it all in. I look up and on the mantle, we're in a living room, on the mantle, I see that's him. Yeah. Up in the mountains in a picture with his family. And, the wife is in the next room crying and I can hear her. So, yes, I had this there's kind of a protective mechanism when you can get into that flow state, but at the same time, in an odd way, it makes you more aware of other things. So for me, that kind of let the trauma in. Yeah.
And that's the thing, that we can sit here and talk about really cool war stories and times we saved people, but it's all trauma. It's death, destruction, chaos. It's the worst of the worst. It's one of the things that was ingrained in me is that we were responding on somebody's worst day.
Yeah. And you have to be at your best.
And you have to be at your best. Yeah. And so you're going through all of these things and you're responding to all of this. And was there any sort of focus on, or I'm speaking from 5 years of separation in law enforcement, so I'm not 100% certain what goes on anymore, but I do know there are things. Was there any, when you would have a massive incident, totally traumatic, was there any sort of debriefing? Was there any sort of let's sit down and talk about it, a critical incident stress management or anything like that?
The CISM concept first came in the rural metro years, probably I would have to say around 2000. Okay. So I'd been on for for 7 years at that point, piling shit up. Peer support and CISM is well-meaning. I think that in their hearts, those people are definitely exposing themselves to more trauma, but they're doing their best to help their peers. But it's got a dangerous side, and that is the firefighters that go through the debriefing after the pediatric drowning at the station. And the captain keeps the truck out of service for an hour. Everybody gets showered, cleaned up, relax. Let's sit around the table, talk about everything that went well, just get some positive reinforcement, check in with everybody, and then that's it.
Yep.
And then the captain tells his engineer to go out and press the button. And what that means is go out and tap AOR, available on radio, or AIQ, available in quarters. And that puts the truck available to run the next call.
Which could be a pediatric drowning.
And it could happen right after they touch the button. So I think that firefighters a lot of times will go through those debriefings or hot washes or diffusings or whatever they're calling it that month or year.
Yeah, whatever the buzzword is.
And they think, well, we went through the debrief. I'm good, right? But then when they get off work the next morning, instead of having a beer at 6 o'clock with dinner, they have a martini at 10 o'clock in the morning after the kids go to school. And they remember the call. They think about the call. They can maybe see their kids at the same age as the patient that they just lost. There are those special fucked up calls that hit us just right. And it's like they know your weakness. So I think the danger with that is people don't seek further treatment. They don't reach out for help. They don't talk to other people after that initial debriefing. So that's a dangerous thing. Unfortunately, and I've said this before, if you fly over the United States, especially if you fly coast to coast at night, you can see huge swaths that are just dark. Maybe, a few lights, and you're looking down there like, what is down? People live down there?
There's nothing there.
Middle of nowhere. That's where volunteer fire departments and volunteer EMS are providing service. And if you think they have a robust mental health program for their members, they got nothing. They would be ecstatic to have somebody trained in peer support.
They would be ecstatic to have an actual just EMTB. Many of them are just first responder training. They're not even EMTs.
First aid,
And basic first aid, and they're doing it all on their own.
Right. So we just have these massive contrasts in the U.S. between having resources and not having resources. Like I mentioned earlier, the automatic aid system. That is a world-renowned, that is a model that people in departments all over the world look at and are amazed when you explain, well, yeah, we're all, there's whatever, greater than 10 cities, and they're all linked together. If you dial 911 anywhere, just the closest unit goes. And it defies understanding.
Yeah.
But it's something that's become so ingrained in us here. It's like normal, like whatever. Anyway, that wide range of contrasts exists in the mental health care for our first responders too. So that's getting rid of the stigma, decreasing the stigma of people stepping forward and saying, "Hey, I need some mental health care. I need assistance." Is that's like my main mission right now.
Yep.
And how I came to that was in 2019 on September 12th, I checked into a luxury resort in Scottsdale and administered a lethal dose of 3 different narcotic medications. And I killed myself. And I say I killed myself because I didn't try. I actually did it. I set up an IV, I injected the meds, and had I been left for probably another 4 minutes, I would have not been revived. But as fate would have it, PD responded. They gave me all of their intranasal Narcan. And then Scottsdale Fire, unfortunately, was the department that responded. And they saved my life. I'd reached a point in my life where I was getting mental health care and it just wasn't sufficient. I thought I was getting what I needed, but I wasn't. And I had just a lot of trauma. I can't drive around Scottsdale without seeing ghosts. When you work 27 years somewhere, it's everywhere you go.
No.
There's the house that burned down with the lady in it with her kids that were upstairs. There's the intersection where the guy was trapped under the car. Everywhere I go. And over time, I didn't seek the mental health care resources that I really needed because I didn't know.
You were ignorant to it, but just because it was yourself.
Yeah.
You didn't realize the downward spiral.
Right. And I was exhibiting a lot of signs and symptoms of PTS without even knowing it.
Yeah.
So I
appreciate the fact, and I apologize. Post-traumatic stress disorder, it's not a disorder. It's a reaction. It's PTS. It's post-traumatic stress. Yeah. And the problem is with that line of work is the event just doesn't happen yesterday. It's going to happen again today. And then there's going to be another one tomorrow. And then there's going to be another one tomorrow. And it's just going to keep compounding and compounding and compounding itself on top of itself. Yeah. And there's no one to step in and say, hey, maybe we need to, Well,
that's what we need is somebody to step in and say, hey, we need help.
What, how did you, my question is this, is leading up to that day, what could have been done, do you think?
I think in the fire department anyway, the company officer or the captain is the leader of the station, the leader of the crew. And company officers have got to have their eyes wide open to what's going on with their crews. But even below that, on a peer level, we need training in this. I mean, the fire service gives you so much training in an amazingly wide range of different emergencies and situations that you show up and you stabilize. And it's everything from a cat in a tree to weapons of mass destruction or an active shooter incident and everything in between. When I went through my fire academy, I had no idea what I was getting into. I had no guidance with regard to mental health or what resources were available. We need to start with our academies in the fire department. We need to start with our academies in the law enforcement arena and not only make new recruits aware of what PTS is, what the signs and symptoms of it are, but what resources are available for those people. But here's the key. In order to be able to do that last thing, the resources have to be available. Good resources. Yeah. Not just your little EAP where you get 8 sessions and okay, you're good to go. Yeah. Yeah. And that's a challenge. There's at least something there. There's mental health care there, but it could be improved upon for sure. The problem is all this costs money. It costs money. Nobody wants to pay for anything. Right. Government officials, they want to
support their own little things that they want to do, but they don't recognize the fact that, again, when something happens, we need our first responders to show up with clear heads. If we're going to demand perfection from them in the blink of an eye, again, whether it's law enforcement or fire service, we're going to need to support them 100%.
Yeah, and that's before and after the call.
And that's not emasculating them, not, part of the stigma has been, at least, and again, I'm speaking from the law enforcement side, if I would have walked in and said I'm having any kind of issues, your badge is taken, your gun is taken, you're immediately put on administrative leave.
Yep.
Why the fuck would anybody go when, and I'm sure, correct me if I'm wrong here, that, firefighting probably became part of your identity as well.
100%.
It's the same with cops.
Yeah.
And when you take that part of that person's identity away, they're not going to want to step up and get any help in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, it's the worst thing you can do to somebody in the first responder career is tell them that they can't be a first responder.
Nope.
Take them out of the car, take them out of the truck. So I think there are strides being made, but we need to decrease that stigma and eliminate it entirely of stepping forward.
Agreed.
And asking for help. And make it non-punitive. I mean, it feels like you're being punished.
Agreed.
When you step forward and do that. And then I'm sure it's the same with LEOs, but your reputation is all you have. And if the only thing you're known for is stepping forward with PTS, you're kind of screwed.
You're become a pariah.
You think you're going to sit in front of an oral board in front of 3 chiefs and somebody from HR and go through a promotional process with any hope of actually getting it?
No
chance.
Leading up to that incident, if you're able to look back, what were some of the things that were warning signs to yourself that you could have possibly, recognized?
I think for me, isolating myself socially was a big thing. It was a big part of it. I just did not like being around people. Couldn't stand being around crowds. Avoided that at all costs. I avoided things that reminded me of calls that I'd been on.
But that's damn near everything.
You're exactly right. It's hard to do. I mean, for me, the call that did me in was a confined space rescue in a sewer. So smelling sewer gas, which isn't all that common, but as soon as I smell that, even today, really, to some extent, it takes me right back.
Yeah.
But for the longest time, just seeing a manhole cover or a hatch entryway, diamond plate hatch to a confined space, like, put me in a tailspin. So social isolation, avoiding things that reminded me of traumatic events, those were big things. I used alcohol as a coping mechanism.
I mean, alcohol is ingrained into the culture.
Absolutely.
It's ingrained into LEOs, it's ingrained into firefighters, it's ingrained into military, that's what you do.
Yeah, and guess what? You do it when you're happy and when you're sad. You drink when you're partying,
Yep.
but you also drink after the funeral.
Yep.
So yeah, it's a huge part of our society, and it was one of my coping mechanisms. Had a lot of flashbacks. Some of that stuff was me replaying calls in my head, like, if I had done this different and this hadn't happened that way, we probably could have saved them, kind of stuff. But also just thoughts that would creep into your mind, and you'd find yourself seeing, feeling, and smelling things that weren't there.
One of the things that caused my downfall in law enforcement was trauma built up. There was a traumatic law enforcement shooting that I investigated, and one of the things that I don't comprehend is why can some people, and this, I'm stealing a quote from a police psychologist, is why can some people walk through the fire and not get burned?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't necessarily think that they don't get burned. I just think they cope with it differently. And my downfall came from a traumatic situation where it began that spiral of, there's no point. What's the fucking point of doing this? You know, it's all the goddamn same. There's nothing different. And I started my own self-destructive path of way too much alcohol. Same thing. And I was in a point where I was a detective, so I would get called out for days at a time and go all around the state. And I would come home at 6 o'clock in the morning and have 2 glasses of whiskey.
Yeah.
Like it was nothing.
Yeah.
And I mean, you know, I think the best thing to do with emotions is just stuff them down deep and not talk about them, right? That's what we're supposed to do, right?
That's what everybody in the community would have you do.
Yeah.
Just as a matter of course.
And
that just has to end.
It does.
I think that there's a natural tendency toward that when you have something like alcohol. It's such a big part of society and such a big part of social gatherings that it's so available. But I wish that supporting each other was the default. I wish that was the go-to. I wish calling somebody to talk to somebody. I had over 200 firefighters on my phone I could have called, and I didn't. Because when I got to that point, I just wanted the suffering to end. I never wanted to run another call. I never wanted to see another dead body. I wanted to stop having the flashbacks. I just wanted it all to go away. And right up until the time that I pushed those 2 syringes, I didn't think I had PTSD. That's the scary thing.
Were you receiving any kind of counseling or anything like that? You were?
Yeah. But I was only going to a psychologist.
Okay.
I was going to a counselor. And I had started going to that counselor after my motorcycle accident.
Okay. You had said in the very beginning that was kind of where you had your first issue of PTSD.
And I was having flashbacks of crashing my motorcycle every night as I was falling asleep. So went and got some help with that. But I didn't get diagnosed with anything.
Let me ask you, were you going to the counselor to be able to hop back on the bike and not have any of those issues? Or were you basically fooling yourself? Or were you going back to the counselor to do the work?
I wanted the counselor to make the symptoms go away. And when the flashbacks stopped, guess what I stopped doing?
You stopped going to counseling.
Right.
We're good to go.
Yeah.
Mount up.
However, I did go back after a stack of really shitty calls at one point, and I was the proponent of mental health care on my truck. We had just a nightmare month at one point, and I told the guys, hey, I'm going in for a fucking tune-up during our 4-day, because this is getting to be way too much, and you guys ought to look into it too. Fuck that, I'm okay, away, you're a puss, whatever. All right, I'm doing it, and I can tell you that it helps. Tell you from experience. And to my knowledge, none of the other 3 guys on my crew ever went in for any kind of mental health care. So it's discouraging. Anyway, so I spent a week in the ICU after my hotel incident, and after that I went to a place called the IFF Center of Excellence, and that's the International Association of Firefighters. It's our union.
Mm-hmm. I see the stickers on lifted pickup trucks all day long.
Yes, indeed. So the COE does inpatient mental health care and substance abuse recovery. So I spent 39 days there. And
Where's that located?
Upper Marlboro, Maryland.
Okay.
So tiny little town out in the middle of nowhere. Very cool place. Within about 15 minutes of my first 1 hour appointment with a psychiatrist, I had been diagnosed with major depressive disorder, severe anxiety, and and complex PTSD. And I still didn't believe it.
You're just in denial about it.
Completely. As days went by and I learned more about what PTSD even is, I started to come to the realization, okay, spending 20 hours a week training on a bicycle isn't necessarily normal for everybody. Spending 20 hours a week shooting archery, and I got into archery competition. Spending that much time alone doing that, something's up.
Right.
And then all the other signs and symptoms. So I came to acceptance pretty quick, but it took me a while to finally call my fire chief and say, I don't think I can run calls anymore. I think I'm done. So that was one of the hardest phone calls I've ever had to make.
Because it's ingrained in your identity.
Yeah. Yeah, that's how you can crash a motorcycle twice pretty hard and get back on and race again that day.
Might have been a little brain damage on the first one, which led you getting back onto the bike 2 more times.
Yeah.
I say that jokingly, but...
Well, yeah, I mean, I damaged 2 helmets.
Yeah.
I had 2 traumatic brain injuries stacked one on top of another.
Yeah, within the course of an hour?
And a third at the end of it, because that third helmet got blown apart too. So I filed for retirement through the PSPRS, through for our pension, disability, but then I also filed a work comp claim.
Okay.
And to my knowledge, I was the first person to have a work comp claim for PTSD approved.
Okay.
Unfortunately, it was probably because of the magnitude of the incident.
Right.
And that was a long, difficult process that involved independent medical examinations. Did 3 of them to prove, yes, I do have this, and
it should not
went through that process.
3 fucking IMEs to go through to
it shouldn't
prove that,
but I understand why it does.
Yeah.
And I had the professional and personal support that I needed to go through those and not have them bring up additional problems.
Right.
Because those were traumatic too, because I had to pretty much relive, what I had gone through 3 times. So yeah, that was a little over 2 years ago. I retired, and I started writing a book. So my mission now is to eliminate that stigma.
No.
And make people feel like they can come forward and ask for help. And to also drive cities, drive departments, drive organizations to provide the resources that their members need for mental health.
In the moment, on that day, was there anything that would have stopped you?
A phone call.
Okay.
If I had just called another firefighter. Man, if I had just called somebody on my crew that day and talked and told them what was going on, that could have stopped it.
Was it pride that stopped you from it?
I think it was hopelessness.
Okay.
I didn't think there was any hope. I mean, that's what we need. We need something to do, someone to love, and something to hope for. And my hope was gone. I didn't think that I was ever going to get off a fire truck. I didn't think I was ever going to not lay there in my bunk at the station with the covers pulled up over my head, because I didn't want the red light that came on to shock me the way it does. I just felt hopeless, man. And helpless.
No.
Because remember, I was going to a counselor.
No.
I thought I was doing the work and not getting any results. I just didn't know. I had no idea what the work really needed to be.
That's the question I have.
And the problem with a lot of people that go to counseling is they're not honest with their counselor.
Right.
Because the last thing you really want to do when you've gone through trauma is talk about it over and over again.
Which, I thank you for coming on here and being open and honest about it. But that's part of the process.
Yeah, it is. It's hard for people to sit down, and it's hard for people who are called upon to help people to sit down and receive help.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm the one doing the rescuing here, not you.
I don't need rescued. I'm fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yep. That's the thing though, is that I had a supportive boss for the job, but I didn't have a supportive boss regarding the bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the sort of thing where I have no doubt that if I would have had a boss that stepped in, and because what ultimately led down to is I was drinking, and my wife and I got into a fight, and it was a verbal argument. And when she started walking towards me, I pushed her. And from that push, she was scared. Had never happened. She didn't know what to do. She called 911, and I was arrested.
Mm.
And I was arrested as a cop by Pinal County Sheriff's Office. And I just had the number 2 of Pinal County Sheriff's Office on just last week, and we talked about it. And he also knew about it in the past. But that's the sort of thing where if I just would have had somebody to say, how's everything going, just to talk. But at the same time, though, I want to be a warning for others to look out for. I don't want good cops to go through the same thing that I went through because they're too stubborn to recognize what's going on. And I'm just as sure you don't want firefighters to fall into the same traps.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the problem is when you just continue to run those traumatic calls, I mean, like how it's never ending.
Yeah, there's no turning it off. And,
right.
And it's what we're there for.
Right. I don't think that a lot of people realize it, like you had stated earlier, that, well, I forget what the number is now, but probably, what would you say, 80% of all firefighter calls are medical, rescue, car accident.
Yeah, that's about right.
That type of stuff, not an actual fire.
Right.
So you're seeing the 80% of the time you're doing the traumatic stuff. The fires are the cool part where you get to gear up and go put out a fire.
They are until somebody's in there.
Right.
And I did plenty of that. Those are, those are career changing.
Mm-hmm.
And mentality changing for sure. I just think that big cities do such a good job of equipping us with guns and ammo.
Yep.
and plate carriers and helmets and trucks and hoses and medical gear and turnouts. They just need to add mental health to this. It needs to be one of the personal protective pieces of equipment.
Agreed.
That's issued. And until we change that mentality, we're going to keep losing firefighters, medics, EMS workers, law enforcement,
military
and military veterans every day to suicide.
I believe the number is up right now from 22 to 28 as far as military goes. It's just a never-ending revolving door, unfortunately.
Yeah.
What would, in your opinion, wraparound services for mental health be in these career fields?
There's so many models of fire protection in the U.S. And they range everywhere from that small town, rural, volunteer only, to volunteer supplemented with some paid personnel, to full-time paid personnel in a small department or fire district, to a big city.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it's got to be a tiered approach, because the volunteer departments can't afford to do anything. However, here's the funny thing that's not even really funny. The fire trucks that are parked in the stations in some volunteer fire departments are some of the best trucks in the world.
Interesting.
Because they get grant money.
Okay.
And they get a lot of it. So they'll get brand new trucks, brand new equipment. It's amazing that they're so well equipped, but there's almost no manpower to use it. But then there's also no mental health care.
Right.
So I think something on a federal level is the only thing that's going to solve that for volunteer type organizations. Above that, when you get into like a fire district type of a thing, and even big municipalities, it's tax dollars that are doing this. So that's kind of where I come in. Like, if I can appear at a city council meeting somewhere or a fire board meeting somewhere and illustrate the need and the importance of mental health care for membership, that's my mission. I'm trying to drive that. So yeah, they're in the same way as there are so many different setups for fire departments, there are going to be different setups for mental health care. Mm-hmm. There's a difference between a psychiatrist and a psychologist. A psychiatrist, generally speaking, is an MD, and they can prescribe medicine,
right,
and that provide a diagnosis. A psychologist will also be degreed, but they act more as a counselor, and then they can do treatment modalities like EMDR, which was what was pivotal for me.
I can't remember what EMDR stands for.
Yeah, EMDR is a method of reframing how we think about trauma.
Okay.
By reliving the trauma in a controlled, safe setting with neurostimulus happening at the same time. So whether that's tactile or visual. Visual, there's a system of lights or a swinging item that kind of guides the eye to go from travel side to side. For me, I use these buzzies. It's a tactile thing. It's like picture it holding your phone in your hand, and it's on silent, but it vibrates.
Okay.
And these buzzies that I'm holding in the palms of my hands during reliving and redescribing this trauma are sending neural stimuli to my brain.
Okay.
And they're buzzing back and forth.
Okay.
There's a lot of information online about it. What I can say is that was what broke through for me in my recovery from PTSD. Couldn't have done it without my counselor, and Jen specializes in public safety.
Okay.
She's probably one of the biggest groups that she's working with right now is Mesa SWAT.
Okay.
And then she's with Public Safety Crisis Solutions. They're based in Phoenix, but she's also opening a private practice.
Okay.
And then my psychiatrist is with Community Bridges.
Okay. All right.
And
familiar with them.
Community Bridges just in very late 2019 just opened this branch that specializes in public safety.
I've heard about it.
I was their first patient.
Okay.
Yeah. So my doctor, Dr. Chelio, is amazing. and he's worked with lots of my peers. So yeah, I've got a mild medicine regimen that I take. I've got a couple things that I take if I need them. If I know ahead of time that I'm going to get into a situation where I'm going to be exposed to something that's possibly traumatic, I'm doing a hell of a lot better, and I can tell my story, and I can actually get through it without just completely falling apart. And that was something I couldn't do a year ago.
My podcast would not be my podcast if I did not mention cannabis at least once.
Yeah.
I started using cannabis for my back injury, my herniated discs and all that. And then I had a breakthrough one night regarding my PTS. And from that incident, and I was using cannabis for my back, and then I had this epiphany, and I was able to think about the instance that really, really messed me up in a way that I could go back and remember it and not relive it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was able to break it down, think about it, look at the circumstances. It was 1 o'clock in the morning, I was smoking weed and in my kitchen, and all of a sudden I'm crying and I have no idea what the fuck was going on. And it was the sort of thing where it allowed me to go back and remember it, not relive it, not be engrossed in it. If anybody who's ever experienced any kind of PTS flashback, it's reliving the situation to where you can't get out.
Yeah. There are a lot of different treatment modalities for available for PTS now. I support all of them.
Yeah. What works for you works for you.
Here's why. The problem is that big that it doesn't matter to me what the solution is. We just need solutions.
Amen.
Whether that's cannabis, whether that's ayahuasca, whether that's things that are not covered by insurance or legal here in the U.S., it doesn't matter. Psychedelics they're making great strides.
Agreed. May I ask the question, have you ever done any of those treatments?
No, because EMDR got it.
Okay. That's what was successful for you.
Yeah. But it did take work. Because I went to dinner with an old buddy of mine that's been on with Phoenix Fire for over 20 years. And we're talking about this. And he opened up his phone and he handed it to me, and there was a list. It's a list of like 20 things. So I start reading down the list, and I realize, oh shit, these are all calls. They're like brief descriptions, like one-line descriptions of calls. And I said, holy shit, is this it for you? And he said, that's most of it. Okay. Have you started working on it yet? Nope. We haven't even gotten there yet. But he started to use cannabis.
Okay.
And is having great results with it.
I'm totally plugging. I would love to talk to him if he would ever come and sit down and talk to me.
Yeah. I think the key to attacking PTS is having a toolbox and not relying on a multi-tool.
Right.
And I'll explain what I mean by that. And for those that don't know, a multi-tool is like a pocket knife on steroids. It's got pliers and a knife blade and screwdrivers and all this shit in it. But are the pliers on that multi-tool actually really good pliers?
They're there for in a pinch.
No. Is the screwdriver like could you really, work with that screw? No. It's kind of a catch-all thing that it'll kind of work, like you said, in a pinch. But in the toolbox, you've got maybe 3 different kinds of pliers, multiple different screwdrivers, and a hacksaw, and everything else. And those tools work very well for what you use them for. So I think in the same way, we need to employ a toolbox when we're treating ourselves for mental health. And The pair of pliers would be preparation at the academy level.
Yeah.
When you first come in here, here's the pliers. Here's your awareness. Now you know what to look for and who to go to for help. Okay. Now here's the screwdriver. That's our EAP program.
Mm-hmm.
You can get care from a healthcare provider that's in the network. It's completely covered. And by the way, it's completely confidential. That is a big hurdle for a lot of guys because you're worried that if I go forward and ask for help, everybody's going to know because it's going to get back to senior staff in my department and nobody can keep their mouth shut. And before I know it, people are going to be coming up to me asking me, "Hey, so that fire really fucked you up?" Or, "How'd you hear that?" So that level of trust in an EAP, there are legal consequences if a provider releases that information. So that's not I'm here to tell people that going forward and using your EAP is not something that's going to be exposed to your organization. Your mental health is private in the same way that your physical health is. When you go in for your annual medical physical, does anybody in your department find out what your cholesterol level is or your blood pressure? No. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
So, screwdriver, EAP. The hammer might be an interdepartment assigned psychiatrist who is dedicated to your city's fire department. That to me would be the premium way to take care of our people, to have a psychiatrist on staff that's dedicated to the department. And I think that would work for a couple of reasons. When you have familiarity with someone who's been around for longer than a month, that brings down a couple bricks out of the wall. When you hear from a coworker that they went to this person and got some help and it was good, that takes down a few more bricks. When you see that people are being kept on duty, they're not being taken off of the car or out of the truck, they're able to continue doing the job that we all love doing, that takes the rest of the wall down. Unfortunately, not every department is going to be able to afford that. However, it's coming. It really is.
That's something that I would love to advocate for. That's something even at the state level. I would love, because one of my functions in normal is to talk to lawmakers, and that's what we do. And I would love to be a champion for serious mental health for our first responders.
Yeah. And here's the thing. I did an annual medical physical every year. And in the questionnaire that is on the clipboard that you're filling out, sitting there in the lobby waiting to go in, is a checkbox that says something like, "I would like to speak with a mental health care professional."
Okay.
I checked it every year.
Okay.
And when I first started checking it, I was kind of fucking around just to see, will anybody even call me? Is anybody even going to reach out to me if I do this? Check it. Never did I ever hear back from a mental health care professional after having checked that box every year that I went in for my physical.
Then what's the point?
Exactly.
Well, why even have it there?
Right.
That's insane.
I think there was no resource.
Right. If it's just an unfunded mandate or whatever the case may be, where they're just a little box.
Yeah, it's a dead end.
During and post your incident, what was the support like at the firehouse or around the firehouse or with your buddies or whatever the case is?
After the hotel thing?
Yes.
Well, I never went back.
That was it.
That was it.
Did you ever hear from any of your colleagues and coworkers?
So I've woken up in an ICU a few times in my life. the first two, there was a flood of firefighters and friends and family that came through to see me and visit me. This last one was serious enough that they shut it down and said no visitors. But picture like some firefighters dressed up as like a maintenance crew or a pizza delivery guy or something. Like, I don't know how they did it, but guys did make their way in.
That's awesome.
They were my closest friends in the department. It's probably, let's say 20 guys. They all gave me a super big hug. They all cried with me, and they all said that they had felt exactly the same way. And since I got back from the center, my contact with the department has been pretty sparse. I've shared podcast episodes, and from what I understand, the majority of the department has heard me speak.
Good.
So that's a good thing.
One of the things that I will say is that now I understand that mine had legal ramifications, with being charged with assault and all that stuff. This is something that really, really pissed me off about my department, my previous department, was that we're a family, 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 we're a family. Well, my commander at the time ordered everybody, and I had a really tight-knit little group because I was a detective in special investigations, ordered every single buddy in my group to not have any contact with me. I had zero contact from my department. I had to call my boss once a morning at 8 o'clock because I was on admin leave. I'd have to call him and say, hey, I'm at home. Okay. One person in that unit told my commander to go fuck themselves, and she's been my best friend for years. She's like, fuck off. No, yeah. I'm going to go check on him. But that was really disheartening to me that I was abandoned. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sitting here blaming my department, but I was a product of what my department wanted without getting any help or resources from them.
I think we can blame it. I think we can blame the culture.
Yeah.
It's a cultural problem.
Agreed.
And I think from my side of it, guys don't want to reach out to me because it's just a little too close to home.
It's facing their own reality.
Completely.
I'm sure you'd probably welcome with open arms talking to people, though.
Oh, yeah. And I have advocated for a few guys that have stepped forward and gotten out with PTS.
Yeah.
So it's been good to help those people. Recently, I sent my chief a text offering to sit down with him and senior staff to speak about firefighter health and wellness. And he responded that they had a program that was tailored to their needs, but thanks anyway.
Well, sir, it clearly wasn't tailored to your needs.
Yeah.
I'm very sorry that people that are still closed-minded like that.
They're doing something different. They're addressing firefighter mental health in quarterly training. I don't know what kind of resources they're making available.
Something has to give. I mean, the problem is something does give and nothing happens. And again, there's things coming in. One of the things that I'm aware of, I don't know if it affects firefighters. I don't know if it's all public safety in the state of Arizona, but there's the Tiger Act.
Yep.
Does that affect firefighters as well?
Does.
Okay.
Yep.
And I just learned, again, from having the chief deputy of PCSO on last week, that ends next year. I don't know, because of the funding or whatever the case is.
You have to renew it? Or
yes. What? So that's one of the things that when I had a conversation with him, I said, I would love to be a champion with these lawmakers and say, why does this have a sunset clause on it?
Yeah. What?
And that's something I'll have to definitely research into and look at. But why would we end, maybe it was a test run. Oh, we'll try this for a couple of years and see how it goes. But
no, that needs to be permanent.
Permanent.
All right. I'll add that to my list of things to do.
And I would love to partner up with you in any way, shape, or form and move forward with this. So
I got a few things brewing. Got a few irons in the fire. I'm going to finish that book up by the end of the year. Get that published, and then going to start touring the country in a year and try and hit as many places as I can and appear and speak and get my story out,
yeah.
share that, and show people that they're not alone.
There have been instances from starting my own podcast here where I've talked about health and mental health and all that, where I've had people send me messages, thank you so much for saying this helped. That's all I give a shit about.
Mm-hmm.
If it reaches one freaking person,
Yep.
if it helps one person, that's all I care about.
Yeah.
Just helping. And again, I should also say that this doesn't just include just EMS, fire service and all that. It's anybody who's going through trauma.
Trauma crosses all barriers. Nobody's safe from it. And you don't have to be lowered into a confined space to recover bodies, to have trauma.
Right.
You can be in a car accident. You can go through a divorce.
Yep.
And have trauma. It can be anything. It doesn't matter. And I mentioned complex PTSD was what I was diagnosed with. So what that is it's like a repetitive sports injury.
Okay.
Where you're exposed to a certain level of trauma repeatedly. So those are kind of just your average common shitty calls.
Right.
Cardiac arrest that doesn't go well, or whatever that is.
Anything to do with children, unfortunately.
Yep. But then you get hit with these big ones. So there are the repetitive ones, and then there are the knockout punches. That for me was that con space call and some narcotic overdoses that went very poorly. Things like that know exactly what your weakness is, and they hit it. So that's what makes up complex PTSD, and that's what most all firefighters have.
Well, and that's what you just said is probably the most valid point of this entire conversation, is that whether you believe it or not, if you're in fire again, the public safety world, and you've got more than a year on, you probably have PTS.
Definitely.
Unless you just, sorry to be an asshole, but unless you went straight from the academy and became a school resource officer or went into training right away.
Yeah. Yeah, we all know. Yeah.
We all know those types.
Sure.
If you went and worked the road, if you went and you were on a truck for any amount of time, you have PTS.
Yep.
Just a matter of severity and the willingness to deal with it.
And unfortunately, the availability of resources in your department.
We got to change that.
Amen.
That's what my goal is. That's what the thing was that's what my goal is with this, is to, part of my thing is to talk about it.
Well, I think it takes experienced guys to step forward and do this.
Yeah.
For people to see, unfortunately, credibility. Because I think in public safety, the longer you're on, the more you're looked at as being rock hard,
Yep.
unshakable,
Yep.
completely badass, and impervious to any type of trauma at all. So when somebody else in the department sees an experienced, tenured member step forward and say, hey, I have it. Here's what it looked like. Here's what I did. Here's what I'm doing to recover. And here, hopefully, are the resources that you can now use so that you can do what I wish I were still doing.
People need to step up and be what they wish they had.
Yeah.
And what they going through experiences like this. We would lose a lot less good people out there. We would have to be lowering standards across the board on everything to get bottom of the barrel because nobody wants to do it.
Yeah. The alarming thing is how easy it is to reach out to somebody. So easy to just call.
There's a pride factor involved, though, too. And there's also that, do they really want to hear from me? They're fine. They're fine. They're fine. I'm sure they're fine. They've dealt with this before.
Right.
Too often.
Yeah.
I can't thank you enough for sharing this.
Thank you so much for putting this microphone in front of me. I appreciate it.
Again, we need to figure something out.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
And and we did forget to mention that I ran into you on a call many, many years ago on the 101.
Yes, yeah.
It was an accident up on the 101. I think it was like Raintree or something like that. And I was like, holy shit, it's Rick.
Yeah.
But let's not wait that long to see each other again.
I would like that.
Cool.
Yeah. And if people want to reach out to me,
yeah.
I am entering the public speaking realm. So if I can talk to an academy class, like I said, if I could talk to a city council, or if I could talk to a small group of people that even just find my story interesting, by all means, I'll do it. You can reach out to me at rickbucher603@gmail.com. So it's RickBucher603@gmail.com.
I have to say that, again, I spoke at the very beginning when we started talking that what I did not tell you about is that Andy Stumpf, I absolutely, positively, 100% kind of have a little bit of a man crush on him. So I do. So when I was listening to the podcast, I had not finished the last couple minutes to get your contact information.
Oh, yeah.
And as soon as I listened to the end of it, it was like, I got an email. I pulled over on the side of the road. I pulled into a gas station and I emailed you.
Cool.
I was like, I've got to talk to Rick. I've got to talk to Rick.
That's awesome.
But I am going to need you to leave Andy's phone number for me. No, I'm just kidding. So, but Rick, your story is incredible. Your story is powerful. I could not be more happy and glad that we're sitting here having this conversation. And I do believe that everything, as we said before, is that everything happens for a reason. And we're sitting here having this conversation for a reason.
For sure.
So.
It feels good to do it.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Rick.
You bet.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.